For the last week and a half, we've been taking a look at how the DNA takes the information within the molecule and transcribes and translates that into a meaningful sequence. We're now going to transition into the next section of the course, which is looking at inheritance patterns within the course. So we're going to be looking at, first of all, some theoretical basis. We'll look at Gregor Mendel in particular. Have you heard of that name before? How do you know his name? Okay. Gregor Mendel was a monk. He lived in Austria, which is in Central Europe. He played with pea plants. He did some amazing experiments looking at color, the texture of the pea seeds, so whether it was smooth or wrinkled. He looked at stem color, and he was able to intentionally crossbreed certain pea plants in order to determine how that trait was being passed on to the next generation. Plus, he started developing mathematical ideas of how to do that prediction. That's pretty cool, given that, this occurred hundreds of years before we even knew about the DNA molecule. Gregor Mendel suggested that there was something in an organism that was being passed down from one generation to another generation. We didn't know what that was. He just called it a factor. Now we know that those factors are DNA, pieces of DNA that we call genes. You all have a gene for blood type. Do you know the blood types? O means you actually don't have a blood type. You lack the proteins on the surface of the red blood cell molecule. Just because you all have a gene for blood type does not mean it's the same gene. Anytime you have different forms of the same gene, we call that an allele. We're just going to start off with simple inheritance patterns. They can get very, very complex. We're going to stay away from what we call linked genes, which means the expression of one gene is directly connected to the expression of another gene. We're just going to take a look at characteristics that are limited to one allele and track that. Okay. Mendel suggested a few laws that you're going to have to know. The first law is that of dominance. What does it mean to dominate somebody? Yes. Okay, so that's somebody who is in charge or thinks they're in charge. And that person oversees and determines how things are going to be. The law of dominance says that a dominant allele will completely override a recessive allele. For example, brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes, which means that if you get a brown-eyed allele from one parent and a blue-eyed allele from another parent, you will have brown eyes, because the brown allele completely overrules that recessive allele.
What if you have blue and green?
That's getting a little bit more complicated. We're just going to stick with simplistic inheritance right now. Because eye color is actually coded for by more than one gene. So it is possible to have two brown-eyed parents having a blue-eyed child. So if one parent is a carrier and another parent is a carrier, but they're both brown-eyed parents, if they both pass on the blue-eyed allele to the child, it is possible for that child to have blue eyes. Simply relying on eye color to prove biological relationship is not enough, and it can get you into a lot of trouble. Just because a child has a different eye color than his parents does not insinuate that there's hanky-panky going on.
Can't people have two separate DNA identities?
It is possible for someone to have two totally different eye colors. Yes. And that's a totally different thing. We're not going to get too complicated. Let's just start with the basics. You see it in huskies a lot. You'll see a husky with a brown eye and a blue eye. When we write about dominant versus recessive alleles, we use letters to represent the characteristic and capitalization or lowercase to denote whether it is a dominant or a recessive trait. We're going to be using something called a Punnett square to show the inheritance of particular alleles. If you see a capitalized letter, that indicates that it is a dominant allele. If you see a lowercase allele, that is a recessive trait. It really doesn't matter what the letter is. I could have easily shown E's, for example. What I do suggest is when you choose an uppercase versus a lowercase letter, try to choose something that is easy to determine the difference between. For example, S's don't work well because it is hard to indicate the difference between a capital S and a lowercase s. So try to choose things that will make it easy. C's don't work well either. It's really hard to tell the difference between capital C and lowercase c. Yes. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll print the dominant and I'll write the cursive for the recessive. So if it was a W, and just something like that. So there is ways to get around it. So remember that how inheritance works is it's biological, right? You receive two sets of chromosomes, one from mom, one from biological dad, and those characteristics are going to have alleles on them. For example, here it's just showing a random chromosome with a blue band. Sorry, I just need to get... So in this case, we have a blue-eyed allele. We have a brown-eyed allele. Because the individual has one dominant trait and one recessive trait, we call this person a heterozygous. Zygous refers to the zygote. That's the first thing that is formed when the sperm fertilizes the egg. Here, the individual has two brown-eyed alleles. Because they have two alleles that are exactly the same, we say the word homologous. Or, sorry, homozygous. I'm thinking mixtures. Homo means the same. It does not refer to a sexual lifestyle in this case. Okay. Finally, this individual here has two blue-eyed alleles. They are also homozygous. to determine an individual, or to differentiate an individual who has two dominant alleles from two recessive alleles, we'll often say the word homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive, so that we can communicate the difference between this and this. When we are asked for a genotype, we're asked for letter representations of alleles. For example, we've been using B's to represent eye color. It doesn't matter what letters you use, as long as if it's a dominant characteristic, it's a capital letter. If it's a recessive characteristic, it's a lowercase letter. Because you inherit one from mom and one from dad, you're showing it at least 2 letters every single time it asks you for a genotype. We usually write the dominant one first. So if it's capital B, obviously it doesn't matter which one comes first. Or if it's little b. But if it is a heterozygous individual, the capital B comes first. That is not Ms. Patterson's rules to drive you crazy. That is what the biology world has decided. So genotype is the letters. Please realize that if you were to zoom into your DNA strand, you're not going to see B's and T's and R's to represent genes. This is just our way to communicate allele inheritance. When we're asked for a phenotype, we're being asked, what does it look like? What is the physical characteristic that individual has? If you inherit 2 brown-eyed alleles, dominant alleles, that means you're going to have brown eyes. We would say that that individual is dominant and homozygous for the capital B allele. If the individual has a capital B allele and a little b allele, that means that they are still going to have brown eyes. That individual is called a heterozygous individual. Sometimes, when we're talking about genetic diseases in particular, we'll call that person a carrier. It is possible to carry a genetic disease, but not feel the full effects of that disease, or not have it at all, because that individual carries the allele. For example, women often carry a gene for red-green color blindness, but it's men who get the condition.
Oh,
Generally, I think it's less than 1% of the population is female and has red-green color blindness. It's very, very rare. It's mainly the guys.
Oh my god, if you're driving and there are traffic lights,
that's why I don't feel bad for single mothers in the ghetto.
that would trip you out.
Do you want to know why?
Yeah.
Or do you want to wait for the presentation?
No, tell.
Tell? Okay.
Bio Wannabe has a question.
He's taking notes. Yeah, well, no, he's preparing for the next quiz. More than you are.
The red-green color blindness gene is carried on the X chromosome.
Are you serious?
Females are XX. Guys are XY. A man can never be a carrier for a color blindness gene. He either has or does not have. Billy's got it. Let's just use the letter A, okay? So, a woman can be a carrier for the color blindness gene, Because if little a is the blindness, she has a dominant normal vision allele that will overrule the recessive. A guy only has one X, which means if he gets the blindness gene, he's got it. He doesn't have another X chromosome to overrule that. In order for a woman to be colorblind, she has to get colorblindness genes from both her biological mother and her biological father.
Her kids are for sure gonna have color blindness. Like if she has both X chromosomes have the blindness gene or whatever.
Yeah, because it's 100%.
Her kids are definitely gonna colorblind.
If mom has a parent, like her dad, that is colorblind, likely her children, male children, will be colorblind. 50% chance.
That means you can choose.
Because if the woman is a carrier, one of these X's had to come from dad. One of the X's comes from mom. If dad's colorblind, she's going to get a colorblind gene. Which means her male child or children has a 50% chance of getting one of these X's. It's a chance. We can say that there's a 50% chance of having a snowstorm. Does that mean we always get the snowstorm? No. It's statistics. It's like saying there's a 50% chance of a couple having a girl. There's also a 50% chance of a couple having a boy. There are some families that are all girls or all boys.
Little bees. What would the color be?
Blue.
He's studying for his next quiz.
Awesome. Too bad you didn't take out the Science 20, otherwise I'd actually be able to give you a credit for this learning.
What can I tell you?